Prime Minister, following your speech to the Assembly, we are assuming that the election itself is going to be carried out in full accordance with the standards of the Council of Europe. And my question to you is just what influence is there in terms of South Ossetia and Abkhazia with regard to the current election campaign struggle?
Well, this year, as you might know, in October we will have parliamentary elections. Unfortunately, our citizens living in Abkhazia and Tskhinvali region cannot participate in these elections. We have already sent invitation to ODIHR to arrive to Georgia and monitor the pre-election process. Our aim is to provide full transparency of the pre-election process, to have our partners monitor the pre-election process. We have a strong determination to hold one of the best free and fair elections in the history of Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Socialist Group, the floor is for Donald Lord Anderson.
Mr. Prime Minister, you are indeed, and your people, European, and we understand your frustration at the lack of progress in your aspirations to join the European Union and NATO. Can you tell us a little more about the human rights changes to make you even more fit for these organisations, and in particular, are you prepared to accept the recommendations of the Venice Commission in respect of your electoral law?
Thank you very much. Of course, our vector towards Europe and Euro-Atlantic space is a decision of Georgian people, and we are very consistent in Georgia's aspirations toward Europe and NATO. We have a very positive dynamics towards Europe. We have association agreement and deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement and reform agenda under association agreement, and we have a good progress which is confirmed at 2 consecutive association councils in Brussels. With NATO, we have excellent progress in terms of improving Georgia's military interoperability with NATO troops. Georgia takes part in peacekeeping missions in Afghanistan, Central Africa, and we stay very consistent there. We are preparing for next Warsaw Summit in order to have even closer cooperation with NATO in terms of having more joint programs to build Georgia's defence capabilities. As to the Venice Commission recommendations, we have already envisaged a significant part of the recommendations in the electoral legislation. Recently, the majoritarian districts, a number of majoritarian districts has been changed to reflect the equality of all majoritarian districts. And of course, cooperation with the Venice Commission is of high importance for all of us. We are absolutely open for this cooperation. Very recently, I had an important dialogue with opposition parties, non-parliamentary opposition, discussing electoral legislation, and important changes have been proposed to envisage some of the recommendations of opposition parties. So this is a very inclusive process, and our aim is to make it even more inclusive and to decrease the temperature and to decrease the confrontation and increase the cooperative spirit before the elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. Prime Minister, welcome to you on behalf of the Liberal Group, and I hail your commitment to comply with European standards. A few months away from the elections, is there any moral tension regarding violation of human rights, especially the right to privacy through the registration and recording of the private lives of citizens in your country? I'd like to know who's responsible for this and what measures are you envisaging taking to put this right. And as far as pre-trial detention is concerned, I know you've pledged to reform this, but it's a very lengthy process. Are you going to reform this so that it's in line with the standards of the Council of Europe? Thank you, Mr. Shukla.
Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, leak of the private videotapes of private life is a blackmail against the society and, first of all, against the government of Georgia. If there is anyone who is interested to have this issue investigated and to find the suspects, is personally the Prime Minister and the government. The investigation is on, and the very first day after release of the videotapes, I immediately asked our law enforcement institutions to launch investigation. We have international institutions and also our partners engaged in this investigation, namely FBI is helping Georgian prosecutor office to investigate this issue. Investigation goes in two directions. First, to find those who were engaged in videotaping, and second, distributors of the tapes. In the first part, we have some success. Five former officials are already arrested. In the second place, in the second direction, distributors, this issue is very sophisticated, and we are doing everything possible to find the suspects. Generally, I can tell you that human rights is a very high priority for us. We elaborated human rights strategy 1420, and Prime Minister chairs the interagency monitoring committee to protect human rights in Georgia. On pre-trial detention, we have asked for feedback for our European friends, and of course we will listen very carefully to the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister, welcome. Of course, the greatest human right of all is the right to life, and may I pay tribute to your state security services only in the last few hours intercepting a sale of uranium-238, which could have fallen into the hands of terrorists. We know in a week where NATO and EU have said that terrorists are seeking these materials. What more do you think Georgia, the Russian Federation and former Soviet republics can do to ensure that these chemical weapons, nuclear materials, do not fall into the hands of those that seek to harm all of us in Europe?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, capturing criminals who were attempting to take uranium across the border, it was significant success, and we take this issue very seriously. We have excellent cooperation with our partners. Recently, President of Georgia attended nuclear summit in New York, and the cooperation in this direction is highly important for us. Generally, I can tell you that we have excellent cooperation with UK. UK recently helped Georgia to build a security management emergency room, which was a great success and excellent case of very fruitful cooperation between Georgian and UK security forces. Thank you very much.
Mr. Prime Minister, you have on several occasions committed yourself to necessary reforms to the electoral law to be undertaken before the parliamentary elections in Georgia in October. Indeed, the last date announced was the 15th of April, just a few days ago. However, according to a number of reports by all the opposition parties, no positive changes in the current legislation have been introduced. Given that the Venice Commission in March also made a rather negative assessment of changes in the electoral law, which were made last December, my question to you is, what measures do you intend to take in the immediate future to align the electoral legislation with the Venice Commission recommendations, and can you give this Assembly a time frame for their introduction? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, there were several series of changes to electoral legislation. The very first day of my appointment and approval as a Prime Minister by the Parliament, I immediately launched a negotiation process with opposition parties. 2 days ago, we proposed important changes to the electoral code to make the process more inclusive, to lower the thresholds for political parties to win the election to become parliamentarians, and also lower the thresholds for financing from the state budget of the opposition parties. Changing the system of majoritarian and proportional, there is an agreement, political agreement between ruling party and opposition parties that in 2020 there will be a change of majoritarian system, but 6 months before the elections it will be very difficult to readjust the electoral system to the entirely new proportional system of elections. So this is the reason why partially we have a consent with the proposal from opposition parties, but partially we disagree with their proposals, and this is where we are right now. We are still continuing the negotiations, and this process is not over. But again, this should not be taken, our proposals should be appreciated by opposition because it has significant changes in the current electoral system. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for your speech. There is strong Russian impact in the media landscape of Georgia. But unfortunately, we have the ECRI report, which is announcing also that some kind of xenophobic media was supported by government via advertising contracts. What do you do to stop this kind of tendency? And would your government have also better cooperation with pro-European opposition, including UNM? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mehmet Babaglu from Turkey.
Prime Minister, in the last 2 years, about 500 Meskhetian Turks were granted conditional Georgian citizenship. Unless the time limitation is either lifted or extended, many Meskhetian Turks will face the risk of losing their Georgian citizenship. Since the facilitation of this process was a membership commitment of Georgia, I'd like to hear what steps you're taking in order to encourage a solution to this. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mr. Irakli Tsikovani from Georgia.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, Prime Minister, welcome to the Council of Europe, as we call it, House of Democracy, Rule of Law and Human Rights. Putting our political oppositions back for the home debate, I want to pose one question to you, which is very important for this House. It's the matter of the judiciary, which you have described as 3 waves of reforms that the government has conducted. But I would like you to describe your level of satisfaction and affection of that reform, which at the end came to the point when the judge whose decisions have been numerously reverted by the European Court of Human Rights, had become the face of Georgian judiciary.
You must finish, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. First, the question from Estonia, Russian impact and strengthened Russian propaganda in Georgian media. First, our response is to launch the massive strategic communication pro-European campaign, and this is very important, and our Minister of European and Euro-Atlantic integration, who is here present at this meeting, he chairs this campaign, and this is a massive campaign in all sources of media, central as well as regional media, campaigning European values, human rights protection, importance of building democratic institutions, and this is the way to respond to anti-EU propaganda. I would not say that there is any financing to xenophobic media. This is something that may be a perception of some of our opposition members. I can say that opposition TV channels who are mainly opposition are financed much more intensively from the state budget, and we cannot block any media source, but we can only make our choices, and we have made our choices in favor of pro-European media, and this is very important. On question from our friend from Turkey about Muslim Meskhetians, I can say that Georgia has fulfilled its obligations in this regard, and we have adopted law on Georgia on repatriation of persons forcefully sent into exile from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Georgia. The status of the repatriate already is granted to 1,533 FDPs. 479 citizens of Azerbaijan having repatriate status and obtained citizenship of Georgia. The process is underway. Ordinance of the Government of Georgia on a simplified procedure for acquisition of Georgian citizenship by individuals having returnee status has been adopted in 2010. And strategy of the repatriation, which is based on the principle of equality of all citizens, non-discrimination and promotion of civil integration, has been approved in 2014. But this issue of extension of the two-year term determined for the completion of citizenship procedures by the forcefully deported persons in the 40s of the 20th century is under the examination with relevant government agencies, and most probably the positive decision will be adopted in the nearest future. A question from Mr. Irakli Chikovani on judicial reform. Generally, no one can be self-satisfied with the level of reform, but everything is comparable. If we compare existing court system in Georgia to the system that existed 4 years ago, we can say that there is a very clear progress. We had 3 consecutive waves of judicial reforms. The first was completed in May 2013, the second was in August 2014, and the third was sent to the Parliament in 2015 December. This is a new set of legislative amendments aiming at enhancing internal independence. Of course, there may be judges that were part of the previous system, but imagine what would be the allegations from the opposition side if we cleared the system from all the judges that were part of the previous system. And we are not doing that. And of course, the system is not perfect, but we are moving ahead with our reforms. and the progress that we have in the justice reform is recognized by numerous international organizations. I can only draw one example of World Bank World Governance Indicators that says that there is a 15th percentile improvement in the rule of law in Georgia since 2012. And also in other areas like control of corruption, voice and accountability, by the way, government effectiveness, political stability, absence of violence, and regulatory quality. In all these 6 sub-areas, there is from 10 to 15 percentile improvement every year, starting from 2012. This is my answer. We are not satisfied. No one is perfect, as I said. It's important to continue these reforms. Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned the growing distance from South Ossetia and Abkhazia from Georgia because of their so-called governments. Do you see any chance to use a people-to-people reconciliation process for bringing the people of South Ossetia and of Abkhazia back closer to Georgia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear Prime Minister, I had the pleasure to visit your country 3 weeks ago, mainly in Tbilisi. That is a wonderful city. And it's fair to recognize here at this assembly the great and excellent job you are doing with the IDPs, supporting IDPs after the shameful Russian invasion. But, Mr. President, this assembly declared last year that the opposition leaders' arrests were political. This means they are political prisoners. Mr. President, are you ready to release them if the European Court rules in favour of them? Mr. President, can you ensure free elections and fair elections if the leadership of your country, the opposition leadership, is in jail? Thank you very much.
Yes, dear Prime Minister, I would like to congratulate you on homeworks related to your homeworks to European Union and direction to European Union. But from my point of view, can you mention the future of Rustavi 2 station? And we know that you brought some level of mildness to that. And other question was related to the past. We just opened, with leadership of our Parliamentary Assembly, the exhibition about totalitarian regimes in Europe. I would like to ask you 5 sculptures of Joseph Stalin in Georgia. How we can comment that, and when it will be crystal clear about Georgian relation to Joseph Stalin regime? I know that you are doing a lot for that. Thank you.
Thank you. On confidence building measures between Georgians and Abkhazians, Georgians and Ossetians. This is the highest priority for our government. Unfortunately, during several waves of conflicts, the trust between Georgians, Abkhazians and South Ossetians was lost. First of all, we need to rebuild the trust that was lost. We have a comprehensive plan of confidence-building measures through offering various social programs, free healthcare services, free education. Recently, we inaugurated a trade center which was opened along the administrative borderline where both Abkhazians and Georgians can trade their agricultural goods. And this is not the end, of course. We have a very active agenda, but first of all, we need to put on the table our offer to our Abkhazian and South Ossetian citizens. And we are working very actively on reconciliation roadmap. This is a very sensitive issue, as you may understand, and we need to consolidate consensus within the Georgian society itself. We are working very actively towards that, and we will launch probably presentation of this roadmap in the very near future. but this is very high priority for us. And of course, visa liberalization is an important achievement for Georgia. Georgians are waiting anxiously for the final result, and all the benefits like free trade with Europe can be available for Abkhazian and South Ossetian citizens and companies, of course. Well, the question on so-called political prisoners, I would call it high-profile prosecution cases. One of the biggest challenges faced by Georgian government is dealing with the legacy of criminal activity by former officials of the previous government. We had 20,000 complaints about past abuses. 300,000 citizens of Georgia were prosecuted. I am a person who never shied away from admitting the progress that was and the positive legacy that was achieved by previous administration. But we should also admit that starting from 2007, life in Georgia became a nightmare for most of the population of Georgia. One can say that we have political prisoners, but I would say we have a rule of law, and no one in Georgia is above the justice. For ensuring transparency of the court cases, starting from 2012, we opened court cases for public and media. Everyone can watch the cases that are of high interest for Georgian population. Chief prosecutor invited international experts and prosecutors from United States, United Kingdom and Israel to form a special board of the advisors, and according to their opinion, International Prosecutor Advisor Panel found that the evidences provided by the Chief Prosecutor were legally and factually sufficient to justify the prosecutions of former high officials. This does not mean that we are happy to see anybody in prison, but this is a proof that, again, no one in Georgia is above the justice. Thank you. And the third question was on Rustavi 2. This was also a high-profile court case. This case has two dimensions. First is an ownership dimension, and the second is a media freedom dimension. In my previous capacity as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I made several statements protecting Rustavi 2's independent editorial policy, proposing creating a board consisting of NGO leaders, media representatives, to ensure independence of the editorial policy of Rustavi 2. But again, this case has two dimensions, and the other dimension is the ownership dimension, and government can by no means intervene in the court proceeding about the ownership dimension. If you ask me what is my opinion, I would like to see Rustavi 2 as acute as it is right now, as opposing the government policy as it is right now, not to give a chance to our opposition to speculate on this issue in front and before the elections of this October. I don't think that Stalin can ever become important in the agenda of Georgian politics or social life. We have a law against the legacy of Stalin period, and this is prosecuted. The raising of monuments of Stalin is prosecuted by law in Georgia. So this is my answer. I don't think that we should take this case seriously, because no one in Georgia has any sympathy or empathy to Stalin period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. We must now conclude the questions to Mr. Kvirikashvili. And Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for this most interesting discussion we had, and I look forward to continuing our cooperation in the future. Thank you very much.